Montana Territory, 1882. The wind cut sharp across the open plains as Margaret Whitlow stepped off the stagecoach in the town of Clearwater Ridge, her boots hitting the packed earth with a finality that settled deep in her chest. She clutched her small carpet bag tighter and scanned the wooden storefronts, the hitching posts, the saloon with its swinging doors. The wire-rimmed glasses of the telegraph clerk caught the sun as he stared at her from his chair. A few townsfolk paused in their day, watching her with the kind of narrowed attention that made her skin prickle. She straightened her spine. She had come here to marry a man named Charles Reid. They had exchanged letters all winter, his inked words promising a fresh start, a home, a family for her and her younger siblings. But when she arrived, he was not at the station, nor was he anywhere in town. Instead, within the hour, word spread like wildfire. "She ain't no bride," the general store's owner sneered to a group gathered by the barrels of dried beans. "Claims he sent for her. Charles Reid died in January. Consumption." Margaret stood outside the store, lips parted, bag still clutched to her chest. "She's lying," someone said from the boardwalk, "trying to get her hands on his land. A cheat, a swindler." Margaret's jaw trembled but held firm. "He wrote to me," she said. "I have the letters." The sheriff thumbed through them without care. "Could have written these yourself." He handed them back to her like so much trash. "I came here to marry him," she said, voice low but steady. "I brought my siblings. They're staying with a woman outside town until I got things settled." "I would never lie about this." "No children were with her," someone cut in. "She came alone." "That's a lie," Margaret's voice cracked. "Peter and Polly are enough," the sheriff said. "You got no claim here, Miss Whitlow. Best be on your way before folks lose their patience." Margaret stood frozen on the boardwalk, people turning from her like she was something sour. Her chest tightened. All she had left were those letters and the promise of a home. She had spent everything getting here. That was when he stepped forward. "I will speak for her," came a voice from the far side of the street. The crowd parted slightly. A man walked forward, tall, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened skin beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his boots and the sleeves of his shirt. His eyes were a deep, quiet kind of brown. He looked like someone who had been out on the range for days, maybe weeks. His name was Isaac Stanton. A cowboy, people whispered. Ran cattle up near the Elk River. Kept to himself. No one expected him to say anything, let alone step into the middle of town and speak for a stranger. "She is telling the truth," Isaac said, his voice calm but firm. "I knew Charles. He told me about her before he passed. He was proud to be marrying her. Said she was the kind of woman who could carry a hard life with grace." Margaret blinked at him. She had never seen this man before in her life. The sheriff hesitated. "You sure about that, Stanton?" "I am." Isaac looked at Margaret. "She stays." The townsfolk muttered, uncertain now. The sheriff, clearly annoyed, waved a hand. "Fine, but if trouble comes of it, it's on you." Isaac nodded once, then stepped toward her. Up close she saw the dust on his eyelashes, the faint scar along his jaw. He looked down at her gently. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But thank you." He glanced at her bag. "You got somewhere to stay?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She thought of the widowed woman who had agreed to look after Peter and Polly for a few days. "Not really," he nodded. "Then come with me. I got a spare room in the bunkhouse. You and your siblings can stay there until you figure things out." "I cannot ask that of you." "You did not. I offered." Margaret hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. But then she remembered Peter's coughing fits, Polly's nightmares, how she had promised them safety. "All right," she whispered. He led her to his horse, helped her into the saddle without a word about her threadbare gloves or worn boots. His touch was careful, respectful. They rode out of town in silence. the wind tugging at her bonnet. The land opened wide before them, rolling hills, tall grass, the distant shimmer of snow still clinging to the peaks. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had dipped low, casting long gold shadows across the fields. A boy and girl ran from the bunkhouse as she dismounted. "Margaret!" Polly cried, throwing herself into her sister's arms. Peter trailed behind, coughing lightly but smiling. "Did they believe you?" She pressed a kiss to each of their heads and held them close. "Someone did." Isaac stood nearby, watching without interrupting. When she looked up at him, her throat thickened. "Thank you," she said again. He nodded. "You all settle in, I will bring supper." As the children hurried inside, Margaret turned to him. "Why did you help me?" Isaac looked at her with quiet intensity. "Because I know what it means to be alone in a place that wants to spit you out, and because Charles spoke of you like you were his salvation." She swallowed, emotion rising too fast to speak. She watched him turn and walk toward the main house, the sun painting his back in gold. That night, as the three of them sat in the simple bunkhouse, Peter curled by the fire, Polly asleep with her thumb tucked under her chin, Margaret stared at the single tin plate Isaac had left for her. Beans, cornbread, a slice of smoked ham. Nothing fancy, but it was warm. She had nothing left. No husband, no claim, no money. And yet, for the first time in weeks, she did not feel like she was falling, because someone had stood up for her, a cowboy with quiet eyes and a steady hand. And something in her heart, something scared and stubborn, dared to wonder, what if this was where her story truly began? The bunkhouse creaked softly under the weight of late spring wind. Margaret stood by the narrow window, her shawl pulled close, watching Isaac hammer fence rails into the earth. His movements were measured, deliberate, the way a man worked when he wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't know what to make of him, not yet, but he'd given her and the children shelter without hesitation, and that counted for more than most. Polly shuffled to her side, sleep mussing her braids. "Can we stay here a while?" Margaret brushed a hand down her sister's arm. "We'll see what's possible." "Peter likes it here," Polly added, more to herself. "He said the barn smells like honey." Margaret gave a soft hum. "That'll be the clover hay." She watched Isaac pause, wipe his brow with a sleeve, then go back to work. He hadn't asked her for anything, not gratitude, not explanation. That silence made her uneasy. She was used to questions, to scrutiny, to people looking at her as if she might slip silver into her sleeve. By the time the sun tipped behind the ridge, she had a pot of stew warming over the stove. Isaac stepped in just as she was ladling broth into a tin bowl for Peter. He nodded to her and crouched to untie his boots. "You're welcome to eat," she said, keeping her voice quiet so as not to wake Polly, who had drifted off again on the cot. He looked up, surprised. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't," she said. "I had more than I expected." "Either we share it or it goes to waste." He set his hat on the bench and stepped forward. "Smells better than anything I've managed in years." She handed him a bowl. "You live alone?" "Mostly." He sat on the floorboards across from her, not bothering with the table. "The ranch was my uncle's. He died last summer. I stayed on." She watched him eat, his movements slow, careful. "You have family elsewhere?" "Not anymore." He glanced toward Peter. "That your brother?" She nodded. "Polly and Peter, they're mine now." He didn't ask what had happened to their parents. She was grateful. Isaac set his bowl down. "You plan to stay?" "I hadn't decided." She folded her hands in her lap. "I was supposed to come here and start a life. Now I'm not sure where to begin." He leaned back against the wall, arms resting on his knees. "You can't go back." "No." She said it plainly, without elaboration. He gave a single nod, not pressing. "Well, the bunkhouse is yours as long as you need it. I've got cattle to tend come June. Could use help with the garden if you're willing. I can work." His eyes met hers, steady and without assumption. "That's clear." She stood and cleared the bowls, wiping them with a cloth. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things not yet said. He didn't fill it with talk, and she didn't feel the need to explain herself. That, too, was rare. As she folded the cloth and hung it by the stove, she asked, "How did you know Charles?" Isaac rubbed at his jaw. "He sold me a pair of steers last year, talked more than most men I've known. Said he was writing to someone out east, said she was brave to write back." She turned toward him. "Did he ever mention being ill?" He shook his head. "Looked strong enough when I saw him, but consumption doesn't give much warning." Margaret pressed a hand to the windowsill. Isaac rose. "No one in town's going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Folks out here trust what they see, and you came without proof they could stomach. I didn't expect welcome, just a place to belong. You'll find it," he said. "Might not be the life you planned, but it could be something better." She looked at him, uncertain. "Why do you care?" He hesitated. "Because I've seen good folks get swallowed by bad luck. You don't look the type to lie for gain. And because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "you haven't asked for pity, you just keep going." Her throat tightened, but she gave no reply. He stepped toward the door and picked up his hat. "I'll be up early. You need anything, holler." "I won't," she said softly. "But thank you." He nodded once, then left into the cooling dusk, boots fading into the gravel outside. She stood for a long while after, listening to the wind tug at the eaves, wondering what kind of man saw a stranger's ruin and offered kindness without question, and what kind of woman she would need to become to deserve it. Outside, the last of the lights slipped below the hills, and the hush of night settled around them. The rains came late that year, but when they did, they fell hard and steady for 3 days straight. Margaret had never known a sky to open like that, as if the land had been holding its breath all winter and finally let go. The bunkhouse roof leaked in 2 spots near the stovepipe and just above Polly's cot, but Isaac patched it with oilcloth and nails before the second night passed. By the 4th morning, the clouds pulled back, leaving the ground soft and shining. Peter ran out barefoot into the mud, laughing when his heels sank deep and left a perfect print. Margaret watched from the doorway, arms crossed, apron damp from wringing out linens. Isaac came from the barn with a bridle slung over one shoulder, his shirt damp at the collar. He paused when he saw her. "You look like you've been fighting a river," he said. "I lost," she answered, "but the bedding's clean." He stepped closer and leaned a hip against the porch post. "You ever worked a garden with river silt under your boots?" "No. Closest I've come is a kitchen garden behind a boarding house, and that was mostly peppermint and weeds." "Well," he said, "this one's half weeds and no peppermint. Thought we'd start on it today if you're willing." She nodded once. "I'll leave Polly with Peter. He's been better since the rain broke." They worked in silence for the first hour. The plot was behind the bunkhouse, a narrow stretch of turned earth bordered by dry fencing. Isaac brought out seed sacks from the barn: beans, cabbage, squash, and an old spade with a split handle. Margaret rolled her sleeves and knelt in the soft loam, pressing seeds into the damp furrows. After a time, he broke the quiet. "What did you do before you came west?" She didn't look up. "Cooked when I could find work, cleaned, looked after the children. Their mother, my sister, passed 3 winters ago. Their father left before Polly learned to walk." He nodded, eyes on the dirt. "That's a steep trail to walk." "I managed." She glanced at him then. "You really don't expect anything from us? Not even coin for the roof?" "I'm not running a hotel," he said. "And I don't take payment from folks who have already lost more than their share." She leaned back on her heels, brushing soil from her palms. "I've met men who say things like that. Most of them mean something else." Isaac met her gaze steady. "I don't." She held his eyes for a moment longer, then returned to the row. All right. By midday, they'd planted 2 long beds and cleared the fence line of thistle. Margaret stood, stretching her arms overhead, and winced when her back pulled tight. Isaac noticed. "There's an old tonic in the barn, comfrey and pine. I can bring it later." "I'll be fine," she said, brushing her skirt off. "Pain means I did something useful." He chuckled softly. "You sound like my uncle. You miss him?" "Sometimes," he said. "He was quiet like the land, never told you what to do, just showed you what worked. I learned more from watching him than I ever did from a preacher." She considered that. "How long have you been alone here?" "Since last July." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Before that, I was trailing cattle through Wyoming. Didn't plan to stay in one place this long." "What changed?" He hesitated. "The quiet stopped feeling like peace. Started to feel like forgetting." She didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she said, "I don't think I've had quiet since I was 15. That why you came out here, to find some?" "I came for something solid. Something I could build." Isaac looked out over the field, the hills beyond still glistening from rain. "You might have landed in the right place then." She turned to him, unsure if he meant the land or something else entirely, but he didn't explain. That evening, Margaret cooked rabbit stew with wild onions Peter had found near the stream. Polly set the table with a crooked pride, and Isaac brought in a bundle of firewood without being asked. When they sat to eat, the light from the stove threw amber across the walls, and for a brief stretch of time, no one reached for the past or worried over what came next. After the children were asleep, Margaret stepped outside. The air smelled of wet sage and wood smoke, the kind of scent that made her think of a life not yet written. Isaac stood by the corral, one boot propped on the lowest rail, arms folded. She walked toward him slow. "The garden's coming along," he nodded. "You're a quick hand. I learned fast." He tilted his head toward the stars beginning to show. "You ever seen a night sky like this back east?" "Never this wide," she said. "It makes you feel small, or lucky," he said. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in his face she hadn't noticed before, a kind of waiting that didn't press, just held space for whatever might come. "I'm not ready," she said, voice barely above the breeze. "I'm not asking," he replied. She stood beside him, close enough to feel the heat off his shoulder, and they watched the stars rise without saying another word. By late May, the mornings warmed enough that Margaret no longer needed to wrap Polly in 2 shawls before stepping outside. The hills beyond the bunkhouse greened with new grass, and the sound of the Elk River carried faintly across the fields. Each day came with work: mending, planting, cooking, tending to the children, and the quiet rhythm of those tasks steadied her in ways she hadn't expected. Isaac had ridden out before first light, saying little beyond a low "back before supper." Margaret watched him go from the doorway, his silhouette shrinking against the rising sun. He hadn't said where he was headed, but she guessed it had to do with the cattle. He never was one to speak more than needed. She spent the morning scrubbing the barn floor while Peter helped haul buckets of well water. Polly sat near the door with a slate tablet Isaac had brought home from town, drawing crooked flowers and horses with chalk stubs. Margaret let her be. There were no lessons today, not after the girl had woken crying in the dark the night before. Shortly before noon, hooves approached from the south road. Margaret stepped outside, drying her hands on the hem of her skirt. A man rode up, older, narrow-faced, with a stiff posture that suggested he'd once worn a uniform. He dismounted without a word and looped the reins over the post. "You Margaret Whitlow?" he asked. "I am." He drew a folded paper from his coat. "Name's Gideon Larch." "I was a friend of Charles Reid." Her breath caught, but she kept her voice level. "I didn't know he had friends still living in the territory." "Didn't, really. He boarded with my sister outside Fort Benton before he came here." I passed through town last week and heard what happened. She stepped down from the porch. Then you heard folks called me a liar. I did. He held out the paper. He left this with my sister in case anything happened, told her to send it if he passed. She never got the chance, but I came through instead. Margaret unfolded the page carefully. Charles's handwriting swept across the page in the same looping script as the others. She didn't read it aloud, but the first line alone was enough to bring a sting behind her eyes. She folded it again, slow. "Thank you," Larch nodded. "He cared for you, talked about you like you were the one right thing he'd done. I wish I could have told him I came. You did what you could." He looked past her to the bunkhouse, then back. "You're staying on with Stanton." "I am." "Well," he said, adjusting his coat, "he's a good man, quiet but steady. He won't let you fall." "He hasn't," she said, voice soft. "He tipped his hat. Then I'll be on my way." She watched him ride off until the dust settled. Then she went back inside and tucked the letter in a tin box beneath her cot. She didn't cry. Not because she didn't want to, but because the children were still nearby, and she'd cried enough in other places. That night, Isaac returned with a new grindstone tied to the back of his horse, and a small sack of dried peaches he set on the table without a word. She waited until Peter and Polly had gone to wash up before speaking. Someone came today. A man named Larch. Isaac unbuckled his saddle bags, glancing at her. "What for?" He brought a letter from Charles, one I hadn't seen before. He paused. "You all right?" "I think so." She ran a hand over the tabletop. It made things clearer. Not easier, but clearer. He leaned against the doorway. "If it changes what you want, I'd understand." "I didn't say that." He looked at her, then truly looked, and something in his expression shifted, like a door opening an inch. "I was thinking," she said, "when the garden starts to come in, we'll have more than we can eat. I could trade in town. Maybe earn enough to replace my sewing shears and take on a bit of mending. You'd be good at that." She smiled faintly. "I was before they dulled." He stepped inside, leaving the door open to the warm air. "You won't need to trade for long. This place," he motioned toward the windows, "the fields beyond, it's more than I can manage alone. Always has been." She drew in a breath. "Are you asking?" He crossed the room and rested a hand on the back of the empty chair. "I'm saying I'd like you to stay, not just in the bunkhouse." She folded her arms, heart thudding. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you don't scare easy. I know you see what needs doing and do it. I know you care for those children like they're your own, and I know I've been waiting for the chance to ask if you'd build something with me." Her voice caught. "You're not the kind of man who says things just to say them." "No," he said. "I say what I mean." She looked past him to the darkening sky, then back. "Then yes, I'll stay." He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for days. She stepped closer, just enough that their hands brushed. "But I want it to be ours, not a favor, not a rescue. Something we shape together." He nodded, his hand finding hers. "That's the only way I'd want it." Outside, the wind curled through the grass, and the last light of day settled over the ranch like a promise. By the time the first squash blossoms opened wide in the garden, Margaret had moved her few belongings from the bunkhouse into the small room off the main house, just past the kitchen, where an old rocking chair sat near the hearth. She hadn't asked for the space. Isaac had simply cleared it, his quiet way of making room without pushing. Polly and Peter now slept in the back room, where the windows caught the sunrise, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted through the walls at dusk. Margaret had sewn new curtains from flour sacks, careful with every stitch. Isaac had hung a shelf for Polly's slate and Peter's whittled toys, and Margaret, watching him hammer each nail with care, found something warm settle in her chest that hadn't been there in years. That evening, after supper, Margaret rinsed dishes while Isaac lit the lanterns. Outside, a soft breeze stirred through the cottonwoods, and the chickens murmured low in their coop. "You ever think about building more fence out near the North Ridge?" she asked, drying her hands. He leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. "Was thinking of asking you the same. That pasture's good land, just needs clearing." "I could help with that," she said. "We could put in more root vegetables come fall." He studied her, eyes steady. "You say we easy now. I mean it easy now." Isaac stepped forward, his boots silent on the worn floorboards. "I was going to ask you something." She turned, hands resting on the edge of the table. "All right." He held out a small wooden box, the grain dark from oil and age. "This was my mama's, carved by my father before I was born. I've kept it all this time. Felt like it should go to someone who knows what to do with keepsakes." Margaret opened it carefully. Inside lay a ring, plain gold, thin, worn smooth along the band. She stared at it, breath still. "I know it's not new," he said, "but I'd like you to wear it." She looked up, eyes glassed with quiet surprise. "Are you asking what I think you are?" "I am," he said. "Not for show, not for town talk, just because I want to build something with you and I want to do it right." Margaret closed the box with trembling fingers. "I didn't come here for a husband, I know. But I found you." "You did," he said, "and I found you." She placed the box on the table, reached for his hand and held it between both of hers. "Yes," she said. He didn't speak. Just folded her into his arms, his chin resting against her hair, and they stood that way for a long time while the lantern flickered behind them. They married in June, beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house, with Polly and Peter standing close. Peter wore a vest Isaac had outgrown as a boy. Polly carried a bundle of wildflowers and kept brushing her thumb over the petals like she was afraid they'd wilt too soon. The preacher came from 3 towns over, took no more than 15 minutes, and blessed them with a voice thick from dust and travel. Margaret wore a dress she'd hemmed from calico found in the store cellar, and Isaac had shaved for the first time in months. His cheeks had turned red when Polly told him he looked strange but nice. They invited no one from town. Margaret hadn't forgotten the way folks had looked at her that first day, and neither had Isaac. But the meadow was full of summer light, and the sky turned a soft blue-gray by midday, and that was more than enough. Afterward, Polly and Peter ran through the tall grass, chasing each other with willow switches while Isaac and Margaret sat side by side on the porch steps. He handed her a cup of cider, and she touched his knee with her fingers, just enough to feel the warmth of him. "You really think we can make a life here?" she asked, eyes on the fields. "I know we can," he said. "We already have." Years passed as they do, the garden grew wide and lush. Margaret took in mending from folks on the far side of Clearwater Ridge, the ones who didn't speak ill or ask after what wasn't theirs to know. Her stitches became known for holding fast through hard wear and winter damp. Polly learned her letters from a traveling teacher. Margaret cooked for once a week in exchange for lessons. Peter grew strong, helped Isaac with the cattle, and learned to ride bareback on a chestnut mare they'd rescued from a broken trail cart. The children never asked about their parents again. They didn't need to. One fall, Margaret found herself humming while canning peaches, the scent rising warm from the stovetop. She hadn't hummed since her sister died. Isaac came in, dust from the barn in his hair, and leaned against the doorway. "That tune," he said, "you used to sing it." "My mother did," she said, "long time ago." He stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You happy?" he asked. She leaned back into him. "I am." He kissed her temple, slow and certain. "Me too." And when winter came and the snow blanketed the ridges deep and quiet, they kept warm beside the hearth, the children asleep under patchwork quilts, and the house full of the kind of peace that grows from love, earned the hard way. They never left Clearwater Ridge. They didn't need to. They had all they'd come west to find each other, a home, and a life built with quiet hands and steady hearts.